wanted just to make sure I captured this. Okay, great. So our mission is to help communities live well, age well, and die well by reimagining the way that our communities talk about and plan for and experience the last stage of life. And so we're structured as a nonprofit. We really believe that we want to make our services available to anyone that self-identifies a need for them, regardless of ability to pay. So our services are really oriented towards community education, holistic advanced care planning, and then holistic bedside support, where we serve as end-of-life doulas. So the workshop we're offering today, End-of-Life Options, is the third workshop in a 4-part series that we're doing called 2021 Live Well series. And the goal of these 4 offerings is really to expose people to a more holistic approach when it comes to advanced care planning. So we started off looking at, in our first offering, this question of what matters most to me. What are the values and the elements around quality of life that are really particular and important to my life? And then in the second offering, we focused on that question of who will speak for me. What does it look like to select a healthcare representative for ourselves, and what might it be, what is required when we ourselves might step into this role for someone else? So we have both of those recordings up on our YouTube page, and we'll follow up with another email after this with this recording and some more resources. If anyone wasn't able to capture those first 2 workshops, you can watch that there. And I'm hearing some background noise. So if everyone can just do another scan and make sure you are on mute. There's a couple of different funny sounds coming through on my end. So today's workshop is called End-of-Life Options. And what Marianne and I intend to do in this space is to look at this question of what support options are available to us in these end-of-life windows. Where might we receive the best quality of care particular to us and our surrounding circles of support? And then what options do we really have available to us after death, right? When it comes to funeral and ceremony and body disposition. So we are wrapping these considerations into our advanced care planning conversations because we know that the majority of these decisions are more difficult to make the first time in an emergency or crisis situation, right? And in circumstances where we're caught off guard by a terminal diagnosis or an accident that takes a life. And it's important that we know our rights, and so that we can make, we know what end-of-life decisions are really allowed, right? And that we know that these decisions can be a reflection of us as religious people or spiritual people or activist people, as mothers and fathers and spouses, whatever it is that brings us greatest meaning in life. So hopefully by gaining exposure to our rights and our options as living and dying beings now, right? This hopefully means that when we and our loved ones confront a space where we're making choices, that we feel more prepared about the decisions that need to be made. And we know that articulating preferences now in our advanced care planning process, and the documentation around that means that people will know what you want and can act on that to the best of their ability when it is time to do so. So I'll just pause here, and I just want to offer up some space for Marianne to also give a self-introduction. I'm really grateful to have her here with me today. So Marianne, will you share a bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth. I really, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I appreciate the invitation to be here and the work of the Peaceful Presence Project. So my name is Marianne Perry, and I am the sexton at the Forest Conservation Burial Ground just outside of Ashland, Oregon. And we are the first dedicated natural burial ground in the state. The burial ground's located on Willow Whit Ranch, which is a ranch up in the lower Cascades, just outside of town here. And I am also a home funeral guide and a green burial educator. And, what's really most important to me is really just that we all know what our options are for life and end of life planning, and also for after death planning. And so that's what I will offer this afternoon, or what some of those options are.
Thank you, Marianne. So to open, we wanted to share this quote by Ira Byock, who is a leading palliative care physician and author and professor at the School of Medicine at Dartmouth. And in this quote, he's talking about a friend who died of lung cancer. And through his experience with this friend, Dr. Ira Byock reminds us there is no universally right way to die. What constitutes dying well for one person could be wrong for another. For dying well to be fully understood, the word well must be read as both an adverb and an adjective, describing the person who is approaching the end of life. And I think this is really beautiful. And we share this just to remind ourselves that there really is no right or wrong way to die, right? When we come from such a perfectionist culture, sometimes there's a sense that, I need to succeed at the dying process. I want to do this right. However, when considering the ways in which an ill or a dying person or their family interfaces with and seeks support from the systems around them, what really matters at the end of the day is that people are aware of and are well informed about the types of support options and after death choices that are available to them. And it's really, at the core about being informed and empowered with this information and knowing our rights and having access to this in our wellness years as well. And so the first thing that's really important to note is that we do have choices. The caveat here is that, we can put a plan in place. We can articulate our choices, and then the reality is that they may become more or less available to us, depending upon a combination of factors around care or the illness trajectory. But the important thing, really, in order to protect ourselves and advocate for our values, is to consider what choices are most reflective of us, right, of our lives and our deaths. And so some of the considerations you'll want to spend time maybe pondering include what care options feel right to you. What does it look like to engage palliative care, hospice support when it might be time? What are my options when it comes to medical aid in dying or voluntarily stopping eating and drinking? What does this even look like, right? Where would I prefer to die? Knowing that we can prefer and it's not always the case, but at least to have these conversations. And then what do I envision for my after death care? And so we're going to go into each of these really briefly due to the amount of time that we have together, a really quick 60 minutes. This is necessarily has to be a pretty quick overview. So first, I want to just have us talk a bit about palliative care and hospice. I think when seeking to understand medical care options, the plethora of terminology can feel really overwhelming when these different forms and variances of services are being described to us, right? It's overwhelming. So to break it down a bit, palliative care and hospice definitely have a close relationship with one another. And there are really key differences in the overall purpose and application of these care practices. So as I have here on the screen, palliative care is care that's available to all persons diagnosed with a chronic illness. And it is medical care that's focused on providing patients with relief from symptoms, from ailments and pain that oftentimes accompany chronic or life-threatening illnesses. A person can access palliative care regardless of whether their illness is terminal or non-terminal. And it's really, at its core, focused on improving the overall quality of life of those who are suffering from a serious illness. So palliative care can be introduced no matter what stage an illness is in, and it can be incorporated alongside of curative and life-prolonging treatments. And while it can be received at home, it's often administered in a hospital setting or an outpatient clinic, or sometimes in extended care facilities that might be have the option of palliative care services. And then we go to hospice care. And in terms of differences, so due to Medicare regulations, hospice is really designed to provide services for those who have a terminal illness, as we have on the screen here, often defined by a life expectancy of less than 6 months. And the focus here is really on physical and emotional and spiritual and social comfort, and looking to improve the quality of life remaining for someone, right? In place of an effort to seek out curative or life prolonging measures. There's a lot of misperceptions or myths around hospice care. So I just wanted to spell some of this out in a little bit greater detail. So some of the myths that we oftentimes hear about hospice care, that hospice is actually a place that you go to die. Do you have to be dying in order to access hospice care? That they give you morphine until you die, right? And that you're sort of in this drug-induced stupor all the way until the end. And that everyone wants to die at home. And if you want to die at home, therefore you have to, bring on hospice. Some of the realities I think that are really important to highlight is that hospice is a philosophy of care, which is mostly provided in the patient's residence. It's generally provided in the comfort of wherever someone calls home, right? It is a holistic and very patient-centered philosophy of team-based care that really is, there to promote comfort and fullness of life for the amount of time that someone has left. So you are receiving support from a medical care team, right? Doctors and nurses, as well as a social worker and a chaplain. You can have home health aides come in a couple times a week for support. So there's a real focus in all of this on prioritizing wishes around personal care when it comes to facing a terminal illness. I have on here 2 physicians, 6 months without further curative treatment. So to qualify for hospice care, someone needs to meet a series of requirements that determine eligibility. So a primary care physician and a hospice medical director both need to certify a reduced life expectancy. The patient needs to really state their acceptance of comfort care measures and the fact that they don't intend to pursue curative treatments. And then in this process, you would formally elect or choose to receive hospice care with a specific organization. We have several clients who've worked with the Peaceful Presence Project, a couple right now who qualified for hospice, more than a year ago and are still on hospice. There's this recertification sort of timeline that happens where, people can be on hospice for multiple years sometimes. So the use of hospice care is by no means, the signifier that someone is giving up on life. The reality is that morphine is sometimes used for symptoms, but the reality is that care options are really decided upon on a case by case basis, right? The patient and their family or whomever's involved in their care is really making these choices and stating what they are open to taking or not taking for symptoms. So it's important to know, that you do have a decision-making capacity there. And then some actually some people prefer the comfort and safety of a hospital to die, right? Many people feel more comfortable in that space. It's also important to note that a lot of hospices also have a resident care facility where, individuals can go and be supported in the active dying process outside of the home. So we just mentioned all of this because these are, great things for all of us to research with our local hospices. What are the options that are made available to me? So we also just want, and I know I'm going through all of this really quickly. I just want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Mary Ann to get to a lot of the really juicy content that we want to hear. Um, we also wanted just to provide a real cursory overview of the VSED and MAID process, the voluntarily stopping eating and drinking and medical aid in dying. After this offering in the next couple of days, we'll definitely follow up with an email and provide some really great resources that allow for a much greater understanding of these dying options and rights. There is so much to say around each of these end of life options. I mean, there's day-long offerings that are put out for people that really want to get into the the legal elements and the complexities of engaging some of these processes. So for the sake of this very quick conversation that we're all having, VSED stands for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And it is also sometimes referred to as end of life fasting or terminal fasting. With VSED, a person who is seriously ill can make a deliberate choice to stop eating and drinking in order to hasten their death. And VSED is a legal process. That's a big question that a lot of people have. Individuals have a right to refuse care, including food and hydration. Some of the things to note about this process is that it definitely requires a really notable level of commitment and willpower and support, right? So if someone is interested in pursuing this path, in general, it takes a fair amount of infrastructure and a lot of forward-thinking conversations to make sure this process looks as you want it to. So as I have here on the screen, medical and emotional support is really critical to a successful VSED process. So a lot of times what's recommended is that, people talk with a medical provider about your interests to see if they can help you with VSED. If someone's on hospice, you'll want to determine the institution's willingness to support with VSED. Different organizations do have different policies in place around, both determining the viability of VSED as well as how they might feel comfortable stepping in to assist. So if you find that your medical providers are unable to support, we definitely recommend to seek out other resources, ask them if they can refer you to someone. But most people typically really benefit from a more coordinated approach to care for things like symptom management and everything else that occurs in the process. Talk with your family members about your decision and determine if they're able to help with the emotional support that will be required, the physical support that will be required. And you might want to see if you want to identify some more experienced caregivers to support. End-of-life doulas are a great support option in this space, just because it can take a bit of time. As I have here on the screen, the process can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. It's a pretty broad span of time. So that, again, is why it's important that someone have sufficient and sustainable support structures in place around them. And then the person can stop the process at any time if they find, maybe it's too difficult, it's not working for them, if they don't have sufficient support. People with certain diseases, especially degenerative diseases like ALS, MS, Alzheimer's, oftentimes find that they don't qualify for hospice care or medical aid in dying. So for these individuals, VSED can oftentimes be the only option for them to maintain autonomy at the end of their life. So again, we'll share some resources afterwards. There's a great website that was developed up in Washington State that gives really thorough information around all of this. Mary Ann recently had an experience with someone that she assisted with the VSED process. So it's great. I asked her to say a little bit just about that experience and lessons learned in terms of her involvement.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my most direct experience and personal experience was with my dear friend Bert this past October. And he was 93 and always talked about his life as being fulfilled. He'd done it all. He'd seen it all. He'd been everywhere he wanted to be. And he was ready to end his life, but he had no illness. A few health kind of minor ailments, a little heart thing, but nothing that would, qualify him for medical aid in dying or anything like that. And so as his friend, I, supported him in talking with his doctor about his wishes to start the VSED process and with his daughters. And, when I think about kind of lessons learned from that experience, that part of my life with him, I can't emphasize the support team enough. We planned for dinner to be delivered every night for 2 full weeks. However long the process was going to take. We planned for people to walk our dog. We planned for who's bringing fresh flowers every 2 days. That's kind of what felt, like a way that the process was kind of held within our community. And I thought that on day one, when it all started, I thought, gosh, he's probably going to only last a few days. There's no food, no water. And we weren't really, even though we had hired, a consultant to come and help us over the process of a couple of years of coming to this final decision. He had some sesame seeds the first couple days. He wanted a sip of beer on day 3. Then it was whiskey on day 4 and 5, and so it lasted pretty much, it was the 13th day that he died. And it wasn't until halfway through that process that he even qualified for hospice. And then the last few days were really pretty sweet and simple and beautiful, but it's an ordeal. And so I think that the self-care and the planning ahead and the planning for after, I don't think any of us had the energy or the wherewithal to kind of jump right back into life kind of day after his funeral. So yeah, I'm thankful that it's there's so much education out there, and the website that Elizabeth mentioned is really useful. And also, LCOR volunteers, End of Life Choices Oregon volunteers, are always happy to come and talk with folks about the process and how to, the details of how to make it happen if it's of interest.
Thank you, Marianne. And I saw that Linda put in the chat box a video about Herta Sturman, who is supported by her 2 sons in the VSED process. And it's a great short video. And you can definitely do a deep dive on YouTube and other sites about different VSED experiences. And, it's something that's being talked about a lot more in different circles. And so really encourage people to self-educate around it. And luckily there's sites that are being put out that are really comprehensive and effective in terms of the organization of resources. And we'll leave that at that point. And then medical aid in dying. And, this, as we have here on the screen, this process allows a terminally ill, mentally capable adult with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live to request from their doctor a prescription for medication that they can decide to self-ingest to die peacefully in their sleep. So this is a highly regulated process, not something that, oftentimes is very time intensive, lengthy, depending upon the state where you live. The restrictions or regulations can vary. Currently in the US, it is legal in different ways in Hawaii, California, Oregon, and Washington on the West Coast, Colorado, Montana, Maine, New Jersey, Vermont, and Washington, DC. I think that's where we're at right now. So as we have here on the screen, that there's pretty strict criteria around this. You need to be 18 years of age or older. As I said, terminally ill with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. You're mentally capable of making your own healthcare decisions. So if somebody that was, diagnosed with dementia or something, this would not apply to cases like that. And then able to self-ingest the medication. Somebody else cannot, give you the medication to take. In terms of, medical aid in dying to VSED, obviously, because of the ingestion of something, this is a much quicker process. But again, you're not able to follow through with this process in a lot of states still in the US. We'll share some resources also that talk about this medical aid in dying consideration. As Marianne said, End of Life Choices Oregon, for example, is a great group that you can have volunteers come to your house and talk through this process as well. They'll also accompany people if you actually end up going through with the medical aid in dying in the entirety of the process. So we'll share some more great resources afterwards. So just this question of where do you want to die? And I want to start this slide by just acknowledging that not everyone is given the choice of where they would like to pass in their final hours. And this recognition that, so many people die from violence and racism and systemic neglect. And so with this choice comes privilege and vice versa. So I think I really encourage people to spend some time thinking through this. Going back to the opening quote by Ira Byock, not everyone is going to have the same end of life preferences or define dying well in the same way. But it is important to know and think through the fact that we oftentimes do have choices in terms of where we would like to die, and that we need to, be talking about this. There was a report published in the New England Journal of Medicine that for the first time since the early 20th century, more people in the US are dying at home than at the hospital. So we're noticing some flips in trends. They found that hospital deaths are still common, but the number is declining. And where there was about, I think, 40% of deaths in 2003 were in the hospital, by 2017, this number was around 30%. So, we're just encourage you to give some thought to this. Dying at home is beautiful, and it often requires a lot more support and caregiving from loved ones, right? So just thinking through these questions of, do we have the infrastructure and the support circles in place? Do we have a death literate community around us that really might be able to support with this? What does this mean? Who else might need to be pulled in from your community? Are there end-of-life doulas in your community that might be able to help with this? As I said earlier, for some, hospice facilities are really preferred, right? That there's a sense of safety and being surrounded by people that are in the know, and that there's this technology, available that feels right for how I'm personally oriented. And then we have on here the hospice facility, just this question of, when I go into the active dying process, does my local hospice have a residential, setting where I might be able to go die there instead of at home? So, at the very least, I would just say, talk through these preferences with loved ones, and make this be a part of sort of an evolving conversation with people, and document this as much as you can. And then, I just want to, because we're an organization and we're all trained as end-of-life doulas, I just wanted to note the role specific to, end-of-life options and advanced care planning. And as I have on the screen here, end-of-life doulas provide non-medical, thoughtful support to people facing serious and terminal illness, including, as I started saying, holistic advanced care planning, education and advocacy support, and compassionate bedside presence. So just having people know that, we as an organization are here in Oregon to answer a lot of questions about this process. We are a resource in multiple ways. And one of the things I just wanted to briefly highlight is a tool that we've developed called EndNotes. We have seen that this holistic advanced care planning process can be really daunting for people, right? This question of, what decisions should I even be considering? What logistical things can I take care of now, including, documentation, organization of personal details and accounts. I have an advance directive, and I feel like that addresses some things, but I also want, to communicate my preferences around how I want to be cared for in the dying process or after I'm dead. So through a lot of experience that we all collectively have had around these, not only end of life windows, but upstream as people are courageously entering this planning process, we have developed this planning tool that really focuses on all of these things, looking at this peace of mind. What are the logistical elements you might want to consider? Peace of body. What are your preferences around end of life experiences and body disposition? And then peace of heart. What needs to be communicated? And how can we sort of do this forward thinking preparation and communication even when we are healthy, right? When we're well, when we have the energy to think about a lot of these things. So we'll share a link to this as well afterwards, not to the actual document, but so you can spend a bit more time looking through what this planning tool entails. So with that, I am going to stop talking at you and ask Marianne to come in and share more details about post-death options.
Awesome, thank you. So, of course, there are options to consider for, after we or someone we love has died. And as a home funeral guide, I love to talk with families about the home funeral process and how to go about that. So that is, one option of kind of doing everything in your home on your own, from filing paperwork to transportation, all of those things. And I'm not meaning home burial and definitely not home cremation. So this is just the care for the body before disposition takes place. So whether that's burial, cremation, composting, aquamation, whatever. And then there's the option of hiring a funeral director. And, even if that is going to be the option to, really have a funeral home handle everything, it's important for folks to be aware that that doesn't have to happen right away, right after death. You can still keep your loved one, of course, in the home for, hours, for a day, and then hire a funeral home to come and take the next steps. And then, I love, I live in a pretty small community here in Ashland. We have one funeral home that is really family oriented, and they will do kind of hybrid options of, okay, you're doing a home funeral but want help with transportation, or want help with your home funeral, or really serving families so that folks are able to do what really makes the most sense for them. Thank you. Yeah, so of course there's the option of cremation, which is becoming, ever more popular. And in the US here, 15% chose cremation in 1990, and now we're looking at really like 55, 56%, and even more in, kind of on each coast. I saw a figure that, in the Portland area, it's something like 75%. And there are all kinds of, reasons of, why cremation has increased in popularity. Part of it is families being dispersed and wanting to, have more of sort of a celebration of life or something when it's a more convenient time for folks to come together. Or maybe it's, a spiritual choice to be cremated. So while it's, I'm not putting out this information to say, to advocate for any of these options in particular, but it is important. I think that, cremation is being understood by a lot of people still as the more environmentally friendly option. And that might be the case if we're comparing it to conventional burial with all the bells and whistles that could entail. But when it's compared to a natural burial, or even now the human composting, it does have quite an environmental impact. And so, of course, the heavy metal pollution, the CO2 emissions, and then, the fuel required is equivalent to, a full tank of gas in an SUV. And with all the cremations that happen in the US annually, we could drive ourselves halfway to the sun every year. That's how much energy that is. So it's something to be considered just when we think about what our impact will be as our bodies are, done walking around the planet. And then this aquamation idea that is, another way, another option, another choice. So it's this potassium hydroxide water solution, and this is what the chambers look like, and really dissolves all of our soft tissue. And that water is sent down into whatever the regular kind of water sewer system, because it's neutralized and non-toxic. And then you end up with the bones, which are then pulverized, just like in cremation. And so that's what you receive back, kind of that powdery bone, cremains or aquamains, I guess. So it does require less energy than fire, or flame cremation. But it's definitely an industrial process, and you can see just it's a mechanized, experience, and it's pretty limited in terms of where this option is really available. So if you are someone you love, really wants to do this, you'll want to spend some time figuring out where that can be. And, it's in larger sort of metropolitan areas where there are enough people that would be interested to make it a viable business. So, here in Oregon, I think it's like, maybe Portland, Eugene. I don't know about the Bend area. I didn't see anything. No. There, I think, yeah, so Portland, Eugene is my understanding. And currently it's legal in 18 states, including Oregon. And human composting has just been the rage in death care news and blogs and posts. So maybe you have seen that come through your way at some point. It's currently only legal in Washington State, but I just sat in on a committee of our Oregon legislature just a couple of weeks ago that were discussing the legalization of this in Oregon, and that could be as soon as July of next year, 2022. So this is where you're placed in these chambers, and honestly, the inside, this picture is from Recompose, Katrina Spade's creation and research resulted in her company called Recompose, and so it's this really cool kind of beehive-looking structure, which is just a facade really on a similar metal kind of cylinder as we saw in the aquamation slide. But it's wood chips and the body, and then all these microbes that turn all of the human body, the teeth, the bones, everything into usable soil. A lot of usable soil. In fact, it's 1 cubic yard, which fills about the bed of a pickup truck. And so families have the option of, just taking some of that, and then they have a forest where they use it to, to nourish the plants and the trees growing there. So, yeah, I think, it seems to have a lot of buzz around it right now and interest, and I encourage you to check it out. And their website, the Recompose website, which maybe will be in the materials that you are sent, is beautiful and fun to look at, and really informative. And then of course we have the burial that I think most folks have experienced at some point in their lives, and this is the conventional burial with a metal casket. Maybe the body in that casket has been embalmed, and you can see that, and often in conventional burials, the earth is pretty covered up with this, sort of fake grass. And oftentimes, the soil is taken off site even. And so the family and friends that are gathered are not, part of the actual filling of the grave or any of that part of the process. And so it is decreasing in popularity. I think one reason is that it's super expensive. And I think having our special spot in the earth that people are going to come back and visit on holidays and year after year, it's just happening less and less, I think. So yeah, we're building, burying a whole lot of steel in the process of conventional burial. 2,000 Empire State Buildings every year worth of steel in these caskets, and sometimes the liners. And then of course the embalming, which is never required or not required. but we do use enough of that formaldehyde to fill 1.2 Olympic swimming pools every year. And, the danger or the environmental impact here is, so it's said that, the embalming fluid is not necessarily toxic to the environment, that the soil is able to sort of mitigate the toxicity in its own way. But the other part of that story is that it is toxic for embalmers. And oftentimes some of that fluid is washed into our municipal wastewater systems as the embalming process has happened. So there's definitely an impact there. And then we're burying lots of concrete in our concrete vaults or grave liners, enough to build a sidewalk to the moon 28 times a year. As cool as it sounds to walk to the moon, I'm sure there's some other use there. And I just want to share that some of these statistics, actually all of this, came from the Green Burial Council's website. So I'm really grateful to them for seeking out the research on, what we're putting down into the earth. And then there's green burial, which is sort of like the human composting in the last years, has had kind of a resurgence of interest and some novelty around it. But the truth about green burial is that it's not new, and it's the way that most people on the planet have been caring for their dead thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, it's always been the way of burial for those that are following the Muslim or Jewish traditions. So this is a picture of a green burial that is actually the first green burial that we had at the Forest Conservation Burial Ground. And so at its most basic, it is interment in the earth in a way that does not inhibit decomposition. In fact, there's an increased awareness that decomposition is kind of the goal. So no embalming, biodegradable casket or shroud, and then of course, no vault or grave liner. So the intention is that everything that is buried is going to decompose. So I just wanted to share a little bit about options in Oregon. And the first thing that I'll say is that I really encourage folks to talk with their local cemetery sextons or boards or commissions or however your local cemeteries are run. It's consumers that drive so many things. So if your local places hear that there's a group interested in your community in green burial, they are much more likely to explore and possibly embrace that option. And so there are a lot of cemeteries that are already sort of hybrid options. So they will allow conventional burial and green burial as well. And sometimes that is all mixed. So you might have a green burial but be surrounded around folks who chose conventional burial. And some have that as a set aside section. So, you can research cemeteries in Oregon. Not several, but there's an Oregon genealogy website that really keeps pretty detailed records on every small, tiny little cemetery in different regions of Oregon. And so some of these older pioneer cemeteries or even just, if it's a city-owned cemetery, asking around is worth your time if it's an interest to you. And then in terms of burial grounds that are being certified by the Green Burial Council. So that's something that the Green Burial Council does, is certify burial grounds, making sure that they meet certain levels of, conservation and ethic of the land and those sorts of things. So the Forest Conservation Burial Ground here outside of Ashland is one in our state, and Great River, which is up in Mosier, Oregon. They haven't opened yet, but they're getting close. And so I encourage you to check them out. And then, like I said, there are several other cemeteries that are hybrids and welcome both types of burial. So I just wanted to say a little bit more about the forest. This is the land of Willowit Ranch, where the forest is located. And off in the distance there, you can see Mount Shasta down in California. So it's a 445-acre ranch, and the burial ground is just over 18 acres. And the burial ground would fall off to the right of the photo there. And we opened in June of last year, and we will be having our 5th burial in just a couple days here. So this is, what you can expect to see in many green burials, especially if it's an exclusively green burial ground. So hearses still come if that's what the family has chosen, or they may have chosen, to bring their loved one up themselves, which is totally welcome. This is our local funeral director in the red jacket. And this family chose a kosher casket that they bought from the funeral home. And then we just, we lay the shrouded body or casket, right above the grave and have the ceremony. You can see sort of some piles of earth. Some of those piles we have covered with evergreen branches. But, it's a really kind of hands-on opportunity for folks that really want to be actively engaged in the experience of laying someone to rest. All right, this was from our first burial at the forest. So those piles, again, in green burial, when it's a certified, kind of following certain criteria green burial, one of the goals is to maintain the integrity of the land as much as possible. So we're pretty careful about the way that we remove the soil in the layers that it exists. So topsoil comes off first and goes on one tarp, and then, the next kind of chunk of sort of topsoil mixed with clay goes on another one, and then the other. So we do it in layers like that, so that then we replace the soil in the layers that it naturally exists in the earth. We hand dig graves, which several other burial grounds do also. Markers are often optional in green burials. We do place a metal disc above the body that just has their name and birth date and death date. And then participation is really invited and encouraged from, picking the plot, of course, to helping us dig the grave, to carrying the body through the forest to the grave, lowering the body, on the lowering straps, and filling the grave. And some families really feel a kind of a deep sense of fulfillment, really seeing the process through to the very, very end. And this was our second burial, kind of down in the foreground there, and looking out over one of our great meadows. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. That was a beautiful overview. I see a question in the chat box from Linda about what is done with the remaining fluid with aquamation. Do you know that?
Yeah, that is, so it's a non-toxic liquid at that point. But yeah, it's just washed down into whatever the water system that facility is connected to, the municipal water system. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I saw some other questions in here. We will definitely share the slides with people. I see that there's some information there that'd be useful for you all to have. We'll share the recording as well on our YouTube channel. Sheila Merle had asked about EndNotes. It's something that's for, we sell as an organization. It helps support our work in communities. So we'll follow up with a link for that. You can either get a PDF download or a hard copy that we mail to you for the EndNotes document. So let's open it up. Are there any? We have a couple more. Let's see, Mary Beth, if the state or someone dies and does not have green burial, can you have the body sent to the state that does and do the burial there?
Yeah, that's an option. And yeah, so actually our first burial, the gentleman died in Florida, but was from Oregon, and the family wanted his body returned to Oregon. So yeah, his body was flown to Portland and then driven down here to the southern part of the state. So definitely an option. Just that does take coordination with funeral homes, kind of one on each end.
Great.
And they just use dry ice. with the body for the transportation.
Great. And then I see that Sheila Merrill, very informative. I also appreciate that you mentioned for some family members, it is fulfilling, right? So if you buy ahead the burial ground in Ashland area, what happens as new techniques and locations come up?
Can you say that one again? I'm not understanding that.
So if you buy, I think Lowe's, and Lo, you can come off of mute if you'd like, if you want to share, if you feel comfortable speaking. I think Lo's asking, so if you buy something at for example.
I'm saying, so if you buy the plot now, or whatever you want to call that, what's available in Ashland, but you don't die for 20 years, there's new things that are available. So what happens? I mean, what if I buy in Ashland and one opens up 3 blocks from my house by the time?
Yeah, that's a good question.
A very updated method happens, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so that would depend on which burial ground you're looking at. At the forest, you have a couple options. One is to sell your plot back for half the cost, or you can sell the plot yourself to anyone else, and then it's a small transfer fee, or you could gift the plot to someone else.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions that people want to either come off mute and ask or put in the chat box? We have a couple more minutes here. Great questions so far. Let's see what Sheila, how do we get the EndNotes document? Yes, Sheila Merle, I'm gonna send you a link to all of that afterwards, and you'll be able to access if you want to purchase a copy, how to do that. And Linda says, or Catherine, is green burial legal in all states?
Yeah, it is legal. It could, there's the whole difference between the laws and then the rules and regulations of an individual cemetery. So cemeteries can require vaults, and that's pretty common. So then in that case, it wouldn't be a green burial because you're burying concrete or, some kind of grave liner. But it's legal in terms of the law. You just need to inquire about different establishments' rules and regulations.
Great, and we'll share, one of the resources we'll share afterwards is the Green Burial Council, which has a lot of amazing resources on their site. Linda asks, what about burying in your own backyard?
Do it. No, no, don't do it. That depends on where you live too. Here in Oregon, we're pretty fortunate that we have a lot of rights to do the things that we want. So, and here in my, it depends on county too. So here in my county, in Jackson County, you can bury on private land as long as it's outside of city limits. And that just requires getting, the permit from the planning department and, filing that with the record of your land ownership. And then, of course, the burial has to be disclosed to future buyers, and they don't have to necessarily grant access to the burial sites. So here in our county, it's really pretty straightforward and simple, doable.
We've had a couple of clients that worked with us in Deschutes County that wanted private property burials, and I was surprised how easy it actually was. There weren't many regulations. So again, as Mary Ann's saying, it's usually county to county. You just want to make sure you've done thorough research on the regulations around that. Wonderful. Well, let's see. Thank you all so much for being here. I just wanted to mention, so this is the third workshop, as I said, in the 4-part series. And so on April 16th, which is National Healthcare Decisions Day, that will be our 4th workshop that is focused on going through the process of actually putting the advanced directive together. So Erin and I will co-facilitate that. And it's really integrating a lot of what we've talked about, these questions of what matters most to me. How do I make these decisions? who's speaking for me in terms of a healthcare representative? What are those considerations? End of life choices. How does, maybe if I work with EndNotes, the EndNotes document, and also advanced directive, how do I sort of marry all of these wishes together and putting that together in this advanced directive document? So I will, in our follow-up email, we'll also send a registration link for that if anyone is interested in attending and sort of the culmination of everything we focused on so far. So thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to Mary Ann for joining me in this space. It's been beautiful to have you here. We're really grateful for your time, and wish you all a very beautiful evening. Thank you so much.